Lake Mead is disappearing, and if it keeps going, Las Vegas is in serious trouble because right now, over 2 million people are living in the middle of a desert completely dependent on this one lake for every drop of water they use. And that lake has already dropped more than 150 feet below where it should be, not as a prediction or a warning, but as a measured reality happening today. 90% of every drop of water that comes out of a tap in Las Vegas comes from one lake. One. And that lake has been draining for over 20 years straight. The white stain pressed into the canyon walls above the waterline tells the story that the numbers cannot fully capture. That stain is not ancient history. It is not a geological record from 1,000 years ago. It is a mineral mark left behind by water that was there not long ago and is not there anymore. It climbs the rock face like a scar. Every foot of it represents a foot of water that is gone. And here's the part nobody is saying loudly enough. Las Vegas already spent $1.4 billion trying to fix this. They drilled a tunnel 3 miles through solid rock underneath the floor of the lake itself, the deepest water intake ever built in the United States, just to reach water that no drought in recorded history had ever touched. It took 7 years. The engineers who built it described the project as threading a needle through a mountain, blindfolded underwater, with no room for a single mistake. It should have solved everything. The lake is still dropping. So the question that water managers in this city are sitting with every single morning is not whether Las Vegas has a water problem. The question is whether a city of 2.3 million people, built in the middle of one of the driest deserts on Earth, dependent on a single shrinking lake, surrounded by 6 other states all fighting over the same disappearing river. Whether that city bought itself a future or just drilled the world's most expensive hole into a problem that has no solution. Las Vegas was never supposed to be here. The Mojave Desert, where Las Vegas sits, gets about 4 inches of rain per year. 4. To put that in terms that mean something, the average American city gets closer to 40. Summer temperatures in Las Vegas regularly hit 115 degrees. The ground is cracked and ancient and bone dry. There are no rivers running through the valley. There are no underground water reserves large enough to support a city of any real size. There is no natural reason, not one, that a major American city should exist in this location. And yet more than 2.3 million people call it home. In 1940, Las Vegas was a railroad town of about 8,000 residents. Dusty, forgettable, the kind of place people passed through without stopping. Then the casinos arrived, then the highways. Air conditioning made the heat survivable, and the American need to reinvent itself did the rest. The city exploded in ways that nobody had planned for, and nobody had built a water system to support. By the 1970s, Las Vegas was growing faster than almost anywhere else in the country. By the 1990s, it was one of the fastest expanding metro areas in American history. Today, the valley adds thousands of new residents every year. 40 million tourists visit annually. Every single one of them needs water. The city uses roughly 300,000 acre-feet of water per year. That number does not mean much on its own. Here is what it means in real terms. It is enough water to put the entire island of Manhattan under 3 feet of liquid. Every year, gone, consumed, used up, and gone again. Nearly 90% of every drop, 9 out of every 10 gallons Las Vegas uses, comes from one place. Lake Mead, a reservoir on the Nevada-Arizona border, fed by the Colorado River, built in the 1930s to serve a region that was nowhere near as large, nowhere near as thirsty, and sitting inside a climate that has since changed in ways the people who built it never modeled. Las Vegas did not stumble into a water problem. It built its entire existence on top of one. To understand why Lake Mead is in trouble, you have to go back to 1922. That is the year the 7 states that depend on the Colorado River sat down and divided it up. Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico. 7 states, 1 river, 1 agreement. They called it the Colorado River Compact. It is still in effect today, and it was built on a mistake. The men who wrote that agreement measured the river during some of the wettest years in the region's recorded history. They looked at how much water was flowing and said, "That is how much there is, let us divide it." 7 states signed the deal. Farms were planted, cities were built. Entire economies were organized around the assumption that the Colorado River would keep delivering what that 1922 document promised. Scientists now know those years were unusually wet, not normal, not a reliable baseline, an exception. The actual amount of water the Colorado River produces in most years is significantly less than what the compact divided up. Read that carefully. The agreement, signed over 100 years ago, gave away more water than the river actually has. That mistake has been quietly building for a century. Every state took their share. Every farmer planted their fields. Every city connected their pipes, and the river kept being asked to deliver more than it could. Then the 2000s arrived, and the rain stopped keeping up. Between 2000 and 2022, the Colorado River Basin went through the driest two-decade stretch in over 1,200 years. Scientists measured it using tree rings, trees that record wet years and dry years in their growth, going back far further than any written record. What they found was not reassuring. The drought that has been draining Lake Mead is not a run of bad luck. It is potentially the return of conditions that shaped this land long before anyone built a city here. Las Vegas inherited a water future that was broken before the first casino ever opened. The compact was flawed. The river was already shrinking, and the city kept growing anyway. Lake Mead was full in 1983. Completely, genuinely water running over the spillways full. At its peak, the lake stretches 247 square miles. It drops 532 feet at its deepest point. It holds 26 trillion gallons of water. When it is full, Lake Mead does not look like a lake. It looks like an inland sea. Then it started to shrink. The decline was slow at first, a few feet a year, easy to ignore, easy to explain away as a dry spell that the next good winter would fix. Water managers watched the numbers and told themselves it would turn around. The river had always bounced back. There was no reason to believe this time was different. It was different. Year after year, through the 2000s and into the 2010s, more water was being pulled out of Lake Mead than was flowing back in. The math was simple, and the answer was always the same. The lake went down. By 2021, the federal government declared the first ever official water shortage on the Colorado River. Mandatory water cuts were triggered across multiple states, the first time in history that had ever happened. By July 2022, Lake Mead had dropped to just over 26% of its total capacity, the lowest level ever recorded since the lake was first filled in the 1930s. Boat docks sat stranded hundreds of feet from the water's edge. Boat ramps ended in cracked, dry lake bed. The white bathtub ring was climbing the canyon walls and growing every month. And then the lake started giving back what it had been hiding. A town called St. Thomas had been flooded when the lake was first filled in 1938. Its residents were relocated. Its buildings were abandoned and swallowed by the rising water. By 2022, St. Thomas was coming back. Old foundations, cracked walls, the outline of streets that had not seen sunlight in over 80 years. All of it rising out of the exposed lake bed as the water pulled away. Lake Mead was not just shrinking, it was revealing its own history as it disappeared. And further out on the exposed mud, in a stretch of lake bed that had not been dry since the 1950s, investigators found steel barrels containing human remains. The dropping water told that story too. There is a number that water engineers at the Southern Nevada Water Authority think about every single day. It is not the current lake level. It is not next year's snowpack forecast. It is not even the drought projections that keep getting revised in the wrong direction. The number is 895. 895 feet above sea level is the elevation at which Lake Mead reaches what engineers call deadpool, the point at which water can no longer flow past Hoover Dam on its own, the point at which the lake, for all practical purposes, stops being a functioning water supply for anyone downstream. At deadpool, the water is still there. You can see it. You can stand at the top of the dam and look down at it, but it is trapped. Every pipe, every outlet, every system ever built to move water from the lake to the people who need it becomes useless, because the water is sitting below every opening designed to let it through. In July 2022, Lake Mead was sitting at just over 1,040 feet. Deadpool is at 895. That gap, roughly 145 feet, sounds like a comfortable cushion. It is not. The lake had been dropping by an average of about 10 feet a year for over a decade before the 2022 emergency. At that pace, 145 feet is not a safety margin. It is a countdown. But before deadpool, there is an earlier problem. Las Vegas pulls its water through intake pipes, physical openings in the lake bed connected to tunnels that run water toward the city, and those intake pipes have their own limits that have nothing to do with deadpool. The first intake pipe, built in 1971, sits at an elevation of 1,050 feet. By 2022, the lake was threatening to drop below it entirely. A pipe that had worked without interruption for 50 years was weeks away from going dry. Not because anything broke, not because anything failed, but because the water it was built to reach would simply no longer be there. A second intake, added in 1993 as a backup, sits at 1,000 feet. Still not deep enough. Still not safe. That is when Las Vegas decided it had to drill. The plan was this: build a third intake pipe. Not just lower than the other two. Lower than anything ever built in the United States. Drill a tunnel 3 miles through solid volcanic rock under the floor of Lake Mead itself, and place a new intake at 860 feet, below deadpool for Hoover Dam, below anything either existing pipe could ever reach, below any drought in recorded history. They called it the third straw. Construction began in 2008. A massive tunnel boring machine, the crews who operated her named her Sandy, was assembled underground and set to work grinding through the rock foot by foot, day after day. Sandy was 23 feet across, wide enough to drive 2 cars side by side through the finished tunnel. Nothing about it went smoothly. Unexpected rock formations stopped Sandy cold and forced engineers to recalculate from scratch. Equipment broke down under pressures the planning models had underestimated. Water seeped through cracks in the rock, threatening to flood active sections of the tunnel before the sealing work could catch up. The heat underground was relentless. Workers operated in tight spaces hundreds of feet beneath a lake holding trillions of gallons directly above their heads, listening to steel grinding on ancient volcanic rock, aware of exactly what was sitting over them. At the end of the 3-mile tunnel, crews drilled a vertical shaft 300 feet straight down into the lake bed to reach the intake point. 300 feet, straight down, in the dark, under the lake, the deepest water intake ever built in the United States. Sandy completed her run in 2014. The tunnel was sealed, tested, and declared fully operational in 2015. The bill came to $1.4 billion. To put that in terms that mean something, $1.4 billion is more than the total annual water infrastructure budget of most American states. For one pipe, one tunnel, one intake point sitting in permanent darkness under crushing pressure beneath the floor of a disappearing lake. Every dollar came from one place: the residents and businesses of southern Nevada, through water rates that climbed year after year while the tunnel was being built. Las Vegas families watched their water bills go up, not because they were using more water, but because they were paying for the tunnel being drilled beneath the lake that kept them alive. Critics were loud. $1,400 million, they argued, could have funded desalination plants, water recycling programs, real demand reduction, things that went after the root of the problem instead of drilling deeper to keep chasing a shrinking supply. Environmental groups were sharper. The third straw, they said, sent exactly the wrong message: that Las Vegas could keep growing, keep building, keep welcoming more people, because the engineering would always find a way to keep the water coming. John Ensminger, the general manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, pushed back directly. The third straw was not a growth strategy, it was a survival strategy. Water managers do not get to plan for optimistic scenarios. They plan for the worst case. Because in the desert, the worst case has a habit of arriving ahead of schedule. He was proven right almost immediately. By 2022, the lake had dropped to levels that put the first intake under genuine operational stress. Without the third straw already built and working, water managers estimate southern Nevada would have faced emergency restrictions severe enough to threaten the economic stability of the entire region. The tunnel finished 7 years before the worst of the crisis hit. It did exactly what it was built to do, but it did not stop the lake from dropping. Drilling deeper was only half of the strategy. The other half was simpler, harder, and in some ways more remarkable: use less. Las Vegas understood earlier than most desert cities that no tunnel, no matter how deep, could outrun the math forever. A city pulling 98 billion gallons of water per year from a shrinking lake in a desert that gets hotter every decade cannot engineer its way out of that problem permanently. At some point, the only real answer is to need less water. So alongside the third straw, the Southern Nevada Water Authority built something that does not appear on any engineering diagram. Not a pipe, not a pump, a culture. The results are genuinely remarkable. Since 2002, Las Vegas has cut how much water the average person uses by more than 40%. Not despite the city growing, during it. The Las Vegas Valley added hundreds of thousands of new residents over that same period and still managed to use less total water than it did 2 decades ago. By any measurement, it is one of the most dramatic water conservation turnarounds in American history. The mechanics behind that number were deliberate and far-reaching. The biggest piece was grass, specifically ornamental grass, the decorative turf that lines the medians of roads, wraps around office buildings, and fills suburban front yards purely for appearance. It serves no purpose except to look green. And in a desert, keeping it green burns through enormous amounts of water that immediately evaporate and are gone. Nevada passed a law banning it, not reducing it, not taxing it, banning it. The removal program saves an estimated 6 billion gallons of water every single year. 6 billion gallons that used to vanish into desert air doing nothing useful. Indoor water was handled through a system that is genuinely clever. Las Vegas recycles nearly 99% of its indoor water. When water goes down a drain inside a home or a hotel, it is treated and returned to Lake Mead, where it earns the city what are called return flow credits, a receipt that says Las Vegas put that water back and gets to count it against its annual allocation from the Colorado River. Every gallon used indoors and returned to the system is, in practical terms, used twice. No other major American city does this at the same scale. Even the Strip, the casinos, the massive hotels, the elaborate fountains that became the symbol of Las Vegas throwing water around in the middle of a desert has been quietly rebuilt around efficiency. The Bellagio fountains run on recycled water. Major resorts have cut water use per guest dramatically over the past 2 decades. The industry that built the city's image on abundance has been learning to do more with less. It is one of the most serious conservation efforts any American city has ever made, and the lake is still not safe, because Las Vegas is not the only one drinking from it. Lake Mead does not belong to Las Vegas. The Colorado River feeds it, and the Colorado River belongs, legally, politically, fiercely, to 7 states and 40 million people. Las Vegas is the most visible name in the conversation. It is not the largest user. Agriculture accounts for roughly 80% of all water pulled from the Colorado River Basin, not cities, not casinos, farms. Fields of cotton, alfalfa, citrus, and vegetables that feed the entire country, operating under water rights that in many cases date back over a century and sit at the front of the legal line. When the river runs short and cuts get handed out, the cities, which hold more junior rights under the 1922 Compact, often get cut first. Las Vegas, despite its size and visibility and $1.4 billion tunnel, does not have priority over farmers whose great-grandparents were here first. The states that draw from Lake Mead have been in growing conflict over their shares for years. Arizona was hit with significant mandatory cuts after the 2021 shortage declaration. Farmers in the state's agricultural heartland had their water allocations slashed. Some faced choices with no good answer. Pay dramatically more for water from other sources, let fields go unplanted, walk away from land their families had worked for generations. California, holding the largest and most senior claim on the river, resisted cuts the longest. The negotiations between states, 7 of them, each with their own farmers, cities, industries, and political pressures, were described by people who sat in those rooms as some of the most difficult conversations about resource sharing in the country's recent history. Everyone had legal rights. Everyone had people depending on those rights. And the river was not producing enough to honor all of them. The 1922 Compact was always going to need updating. A provision in the agreement set 2026 as the deadline for the 7 states to sit back down and renegotiate, to work out a new deal that accounts for a century of change, a shrinking river, and the reality that the original numbers were built on a foundation that was never solid. 2026 is here. Those conversations are happening right now. They are harder than anything the 1922 negotiators ever faced, because in 1922, there was at least the illusion of abundance. Today, everyone in the room can see the bathtub ring on the canyon walls. Everyone knows what the numbers say, and the central question being asked, how do you fairly divide something that is already too small to go around, is not a question with a clean answer. No tunnel makes that decision. Then something happened that nobody saw coming. The winter of 2022 into 2023 delivered record snowfall across the Rocky Mountains. Not just a good snow year, an extraordinary one. The mountains that feed the Colorado River were buried in snowpack that forecasters had not seen in a generation. When spring arrived and temperatures climbed, that snow melted and ran downhill. Into rivers, into streams, and eventually into Lake Mead. The lake rose by more than 20 feet in a single year. Lake Powell, sitting upstream on the same system, rose by more than 50 feet. The Bureau of Reclamation scrapped its decline projections and rewrote its 2-year forecast from scratch. People exhaled. Scientists urged caution immediately. Not after a few weeks of good headlines. Immediately. Because the scientists who study this system understood what the headlines did not fully say. One exceptional winter does not cancel 20 years of overuse. The lake was still more than 160 feet below full capacity when the recovery peaked. The improvement was real. It was also fragile, weather-dependent, and built on conditions that climate models suggest will become increasingly rare as the decades ahead unfold. The bathtub ring did not disappear. It shrank slightly. The mineral stain moved a little lower on the canyon wall, but it is still there, pressed into the rock. And the following years brought the reminder that one good winter is not a solution. It is a pause. There is a significant difference between those two things, and water managers are not paid to forget it. The third straw was not built for 2023, it was built for the next dry stretch, and the next one after that. The tunnel sits 3 miles under Lake Mead right now, fully operational, pulling water from depths no drought has ever reached, waiting for the moment when the other 2 intakes can no longer get to the surface. That moment has not arrived yet. Nothing about the 2023 recovery guaranteed it never will. Climate projections for the American Southwest are not ambiguous. The region is getting hotter, drier, and less predictable. The forecasts that once described worst-case scenarios for the Colorado River Basin are being revised, not toward better outcomes, but toward faster and more severe ones. What scientists called a concerning possibility 15 years ago is now being discussed as the likely baseline. Higher temperatures mean more evaporation. More evaporation means the lake loses water faster even when the same amount of rain falls. A lake that once lost a certain amount of water to evaporation every year now loses more, not because it is being used more heavily, but because the air above it is warmer and drier and pulls harder. The snowpack that feeds the Colorado River is changing too. Snow at lower elevations, snow that used to stay frozen through the winter and release slowly into rivers as spring arrived, is now melting earlier. Sometimes it evaporates before it ever reaches a stream. The steady, reliable spring melt that the river has depended on for as long as anyone has been measuring it is becoming less steady and less reliable. And then there is the paleoclimate research. The research that goes back further than any weather station, further than any river gauge, further than any modern record. Scientists studying tree rings and sediment layers and ancient geological records have found evidence of something that puts everything else in perspective. The Colorado River Basin has experienced what researchers call mega droughts. Droughts lasting not years but decades. Conditions far drier, far longer, and far more severe than anything in the modern record. The worst drought of the 20th century was a minor inconvenience compared to what this land survived before. The 20-year dry stretch that drained Lake Mead to 26% capacity may not have been an unusual event. It may have been a preview of what this region returns to when the climate cycles shift. And the climate is shifting. The third straw reaches water at 860 feet. That is below deadpool for Hoover Dam, but the lake itself has a harder limit. If the water drops below 895 feet and stays there, if it simply stops being replenished, the third straw becomes irrelevant. The intake still exists, the tunnel is still there, but the water it was built to reach is gone, below it, unreachable by any engineering solution that has ever been attempted. Water managers at the Southern Nevada Water Authority do not discuss this casually. They do not dismiss it either. The dropping lake level is the crisis everyone can see. There are others that most people have never heard of. As Lake Mead rises and falls dramatically, gaining 20 feet one year, losing 15 the next, the lake bed is being disturbed in ways that concern scientists. Decades of mining operations and industrial activity along the shoreline left behind contamination that was considered safely locked away when it was sitting underwater and undisturbed. When the water drops and those old sites are exposed, contamination can move again. When the water rises and refloods them, it can carry what it finds back into the lake. The third straw was built to reach the water. It was not built to guarantee what comes through it. There is also the power problem, which most people in Las Vegas have never connected to the water problem. Hoover Dam does not just hold the lake back, it generates electricity. Power that flows to Nevada, Arizona, and California and serves millions of homes and businesses. As Lake Mead drops, the dam generates less power. At sufficiently low levels, it stops generating usable power entirely. The moment when Las Vegas loses access to reliable water and the moment when Las Vegas loses access to Hoover Dam power are, in the worst scenarios, the same moment. No tunnel was built to solve that. And then there is what the low water has already revealed. Not just the old town of St. Thomas, not just the sunken boats, not just the human remains in steel barrels. The receding shoreline has exposed stretches of lake bed that have not been seen in decades, and scientists are still studying what is there. The lake held these things safely for generations. The lake is giving them back now, and not always in ways anyone planned for. The Southern Nevada Water Authority does not sit still. It never has. beyond the third straw and the conservation programs already in place, there are conversations happening right now about what comes after, about what Las Vegas does if the lake drops again, drops further, drops in ways that even the deepest intake pipe cannot address. Desalination is part of the conversation. The Pacific Ocean is not impossibly far away. Removing the salt from seawater and pumping it inland is technically possible. It is also extremely expensive, energy-heavy, and carries environmental consequences that have not been fully worked through. No major desalination project currently supplies Las Vegas. It is a future option, not a present solution. Advanced water recycling is further along. Las Vegas already returns nearly all of its indoor water to Lake Mead. The next step is treating used water to a standard where it can re-enter the drinking supply more directly, cutting out the round trip through the lake. The technology works. The harder challenge is convincing people to accept it, what critics call the toilet-to-tap problem, which is mostly a perception issue and not a scientific one. Regional cooperation has become unavoidable. Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, Los Angeles, and dozens of smaller cities across the basin have spent years in negotiations that require all of them to give something up. Tucson voluntarily reduced its Lake Mead allocation and accepted federal compensation in return. Other cities followed. The old framework, every state defending its legal rights, every user for themselves, has been quietly replaced by something more collaborative, because the alternative is that everyone loses together. Nevada has restricted water use more aggressively than most states. The ornamental grass ban was the beginning. Proposals to cap how much water a single household can use in a year, the first regulation of this kind anywhere in the country, have been put forward, generating pushback from residents and support from water managers who describe it as basic arithmetic. When a resource is genuinely limited, unlimited individual use is not a right the system can keep supporting. It is not enough to end the problem. It is enough to slow it down. And in the desert, slowing it down is not nothing. Slowing it down is everything. Slowing it down buys time for policy to catch up with physics, buys time for technology to advance, buys time for the snowpack to return and the lake to breathe again. The question is whether that time gets used wisely. That is not an engineering question. No tunnel answers it. The water crisis is not an elevation reading on a federal gauge. It is a reality that ordinary people in the Las Vegas Valley live with every day in ways that have become so normal, most of them have stopped noticing. Water bills have climbed year after year for 2 decades, funding the tunnels and the recycling systems and the conservation programs that keep the city running. Families who moved to Las Vegas for affordable desert living now face utility costs that would have surprised their earlier selves. They do not always know why the bills went up. They just know they did. Las Vegas has already started changing because grass is disappearing and being replaced with rock, and what used to look cheap is now survival. People don't just check the weather anymore, they check the lake level, watching it drop because they know everything depends on it. And this isn't just Las Vegas, because cities across the West are all pulling from the same shrinking river. And soon, someone has to decide who gets water and who doesn't. Because no tunnel or billion-dollar project can fix the real problem, there isn't enough water anymore. The city adapted. It saved water. It built everything it could, but it cannot make it rain. And beneath Lake Mead, the final backup plan is still waiting to be tested.